I mean, I guess just to kick off, I'll kick things off, and then we'll take some questions from the audience today. Chris, you made a point there, and I'd like to get both of your opinions on this. It's a lot about, we hear a lot about, delivering value to the brand, delivering value to the agency, delivering value to the media owner, and creating inventory that's sellable. Is there a shift now towards thinking about the consumer more, or is that still a gap in terms of the value proposition?
Yeah, I mean, from our standpoint, we absolutely believe there's a shift in thinking about the consumer, and again, a lot of it is driven by, as I mentioned earlier, the companies that are getting the most traction. If you think about Instagram and you think about Facebook, that have the lion's share of users from a mobile perspective, there's a massive consideration set to experience and what the user sees and when. Whether they introduce advertising, whether they introduce it in a way that's kind of viable and conducive. We are absolutely at a turning point right now that next generation founders, publishers, app developers have a serious consideration set when they think about partners to monetize. So we are a partner that can monetize your inventory, and we know, and Sandy can speak to this being in San Francisco as well, but today, if you talk to a developer that's built a game or any sort of mobile web site, the first thing that they're going to think about as as you're trying to monetize is, how do you think about my users? Is your ad product going to be conducive? And they challenge you. They challenge you really hard. There's all sorts of vendors out there that kind of look and feel the same, but it's nice to see, I believe, this really high bar as it relates to thinking about the end consumer, the consumer experience.
Sandy, what are your thoughts on that?
It's a good question. I mean, I guess I'll kind of pick up where you left off. I think, obviously, when you look at content in general, and it could be social content, it could be game content, it could be classical content, if you will, across different verticals, all of that, those content producers need to keep the lights on, and they're going to do that in either a media model or a subscription model or a combination thereof. And I think the responsible, the very user-centric publishers and app developers are certainly mindful of their ad footprint. They're certainly mindful of, and I'll use kind of the game analogy for a moment, that if there's an achievement moment that could be taken advantage of, that maybe that is a great place to set up an opportunity for an ad. But I think at the end of the day, as a provider of technology, we don't have entire control over how those publishers will ultimately kind of navigate that within their specific content. What we do have control over is the ability to get the best brand experience possible to the best set of customers possible, and report back on those activities within that engagement experience. And to the extent that we find, and this goes for, I think, both our organizations, the particular publishers or app developers that really do have those great experiences, then by all means, that's a great place for brands to advertise.
Great. And in terms of moving money to mobile, dollars following eyeballs, what do you think the big roadblocks are? What's causing this perhaps lag in dollars not following eyeballs?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier, it's not the eyeballs. It's the opportunity. It's the look, the folks that are spending digital dollars all have smartphones, and they have not been sold or blown away at scale. Again, from a campaign basis. Appssavvy runs hundreds of campaigns. They can work with various publishers and see a one-off case study that we just highlighted a few, but they're not convinced yet that they can drop $5-10 million, right, away and take it away from television or broadcast, I should say, and move it into mobile. So the good news is that the perception and the awareness that people have, everyone has smartphones and there's an opportunity to reach a consumer is there. That is fundamentally there. The technology gap was, I mean, look, it's been Millennial, Jump Tap, and other sort of large mobile networks for the majority of the last 3 or 4 years. Today, there are also companies that are offering larger canvases. I think larger canvases at scale, where brands can really feel like they can own the real estate, but also there's going to need to be some further data through the Nielsen's and the ComScores and others for them to actually feel that they're reaching a lot of people at the right time. Because if they're going to be moving their dollars, right now television still has the easiest way to measure an audience and to get results. So for those dollars to come into mobile, there's still a little bit of work to be done as far as tracking an audience.
Yep. You could answer lots of ways, right? We can look at kind of how media has evolved over the years, and certainly ultimately the advertisers and the brands will get to where the users are. I think we've got a couple decades of standardization under our belt as it relates to the internet. There's just a finite number of browsers. There's a finite number of there's very standardized. The IAB has done a pretty good job with that. It kind of all makes sense. Social media has been in the grand scheme of things a relative recent addition, and even the app economy for that matter. But there were many. If you ask somebody a number of years ago, will there be a world where MySpace isn't massive? People couldn't even fathom that. So there is the potential for this like post-app world, post even Facebook world at some point in the future. What I'm driving at with that is when you think about the dollars, they just don't happen instantly, and this medium is more fragmented, more sophisticated than the browser experience was. And it's only been in the last couple of years where kind of the barrier to entry relative to the cost of devices, where the speed of connectivity has matured to a level where you could really consume nice multimedia at scale, and where the adoption levels are kind of where they need to be. So I think, every year's the year of mobile, for one, and for two, we're really, I think in the next few years is when we're really going to see the radical shift, because it's no longer a luxury product or a luxury medium. It's now a medium for the masses, and I think that's going to change everything.
Okay, great. Do we have any questions from the audience? As if we can get a microphone to the gentleman at the front and one at the back. I beg your pardon. If you could just say who you are and which company you're with, and.
Dr. Khalid from Turkey. As to my opinion, in the ad business, health category is differing a little bit than the other categories. What do you think on your field that to engage the e-patients and wellness concerned people, how you can engage to your platforms? Thank you.
I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand. The question was about how could you repeat the question? Sorry.
How you can engage the e-patients and also the wellness concerned people to the platforms for the advertisements?
So I'll take sort of a broader answer to your question, which is around targeting, because it sounds like you're trying to reach a patient of some sort. I think right now, if there's something very targeted that you're trying to do, it's probably best to try to line up with some sort of adjacency of content that's driven around, in this particular case, if I heard you correctly, and I apologize, medical or patients or whatnot. That's probably going to be your best bet. There's obviously an ecosystem of data that you can actually buy information or data on a specific user profile. That obviously takes some of the flavor away of what we just talked about, which is brand advertising and impactful ads. I mean, it really just comes down to what is an objective? Like, what are you trying to achieve? If you're trying to get somebody to watch your trailer, if you're trying to sell a new smartphone, if you're trying to get someone to drink your beverage, I think these examples really, or see your movie, I think these are great examples that highlight the most effective way to get people excited about your brand or your content in mobile. if you're trying to get something more specific, who knows if this is actually even the best category or vehicle to do that. But I would say, this conversation around best advertising practices is really driven around brand advertising.
And we had one more question from the gentleman at the front.
Good morning, Roberto Kaufman from Do. Two questions actually. Where do you feel we are on location-based advertising, and where do you think mobile advertising will differ from today in 5 years' time other than scale?
Sure. Let me do the first one was around kind of the state of location-based, and the second was how it'll differentiate. I missed what the key part of the second one was.
How is mobile advertising going to evolve over the next 5 years other than scale?
Okay. Sure. So for location-based, I mean, I think the current state of location-based is pretty great as compared to where we were just a number of years ago. And so if you are advertising in an application that has already opted in for location, we can get very close down to lat long, and you can also overlay that against intelligent mapping systems that can from there infer where that person is. And there's a great analogy that my friend John Hadel, who's with U.S. Ventures, uses, and that is, if you see a mobile device, that user's in a park. If they're in the park at 8 a.m., they might be walking their dog. If they're in the park at 11 or 12, it's probably someone with children, not at work. And so then you start to say, okay, well, you've got all of these different kind of parameters that are being passed back to you: lat longitude, maybe cross-referencing over mapping, time of day, and from there, what can you infer about that user? So I think location's really exciting right now. With most mobile networks across everywhere, you can get down to zip level, and then either whether you have a user opt-in within the ad or whether they're already opted in through an application, and you could get down to lat long. You could do some interesting things.
Can I answer that too?
Yeah, and then we'll do the scale.
As far as the locate, so funny enough, Foursquare is our next door neighbor in Soho in New York. They have not successfully launched a local-based ad business as far as a revenue perspective. So now they're actually taking more on the lines of large brand advertising after moments within the Foursquare ecosystem, and that's a pioneer in location. So I think it's very challenging, and I probably have maybe an opposite thought. I'm just not sold that just understanding that somebody's walking by a sub shop or a coffee and actually talk, hey, you're walking by a coffee shop, do you want a coffee? I think that lacks some of the points that I was making earlier, which is the context and the timing. So I think it's interesting, and there's technology that can potentially understand that you're walking by someplace that you may want to buy a coffee, but I'm not sold on the fact that that's actually going to drive in-store purchase, because I think it lacks other components that make advertising effective.
So, yeah, the second was about the next 5 years. Obviously, it will continue to scale. I think a lot of folks are talking about mobile. Mobile's really, obviously critical, but mobile's not just mobile phones, right? It's tablets and tweens, and when you look at kind of a more holistic view of the environment, I feel we're at a point now that we are dealing with screen sizes and content environments that can be nearly, if not more, engaging and immersive than the 10-foot experience. So I think that what we're going to see over the next few years is that as brands and the agencies that represent them get a greater comfort level around executing in these environments at scale, that we're going to see that shift that we've all, that tectonic shift that we've all been waiting for, where we've been seeing it get a little better each year, but where is the huge windfall? I think that is what's kind of on the horizon, because I know, personally, that I'd almost prefer, and I know you mentioned Mad Men earlier, I think everybody in our industry in the US is addicted to that show. I'd almost rather watch that on my Retina display tablet with my high-def headphones on than I would in my living room, and know that I could bang it out when I'm in a flight here, or not when I'm with family and friends and really want to actually disconnect, which actually is not to tangent here, but I think that's going to become a big part of the space where we're going to see the dollars come, we're going to see the engagement level, and then we're also going to see people start to manage their disconnectivity just as much as their connectivity.
Yeah, I don't think there'll be mobile shows in 5 years. I think it's going to be advertising. I think we'll be past the point of dollars flowing and how and when and technology. I think all those gaps will have been solved, and we're going to see the majority of digital dollars flowing in mobile. So that's my prediction in 5 years. It won't be come learn about mobile at the mobile show. It will be that's digital advertising, and there'll probably be a much stronger convergence as it relates to less about devices, and it's just going to be much more of this is advertising in digital. And we'll probably stop saying mobile as much, because it's just going to be kind of a pretty obvious place that brands are going to be spending a lot of money.
Do we have any more questions before we wrap up? Okay, I'd just like to conclude before we thank you guys. Just to put one question to both of you. What do you think the biggest change that needs to happen, and who needs to make it for this vision that you talk about in 5 years to actually become reality?
Yeah, it's a great question. So 2 parts. I mentioned earlier in my talk that the plumbing and the infrastructure of how and when ads get delivered, if the publishers, and again, when I say publishers, I'm talking about also app developers, if they don't open up their minds to not delivering ads based on a page load or impression, we're going to be stuck in sort of old school advertising. I know Mark Franz from the New York Times was here yesterday. The Times is an investor in our company. I know Mark. Those guys have rebuilt their property to build native ad products. Boston.com, where I'm from, has rebuilt their property to be native, both from an editorial and an ad play. Forbes, Time Inc., large New York-based media companies are all open for the first time to thinking about how and when ads get delivered. So publishers need to invest in better infrastructure to trigger ads, number 1. 2, which is unfortunately a massive challenge, and I don't see this getting solved anytime, the agency holding companies are completely challenged or screwed up. The model's broken, they're paid based on a margin, they're not incentivized for innovation, and they're not trained to leverage new technologies and new platforms that present themselves today. And we know that that's one of our challenges as a company. We know other companies in our ecosystem have that same challenge. So the agency holding companies need to also do a 180 as it relates to their investment in understanding how to leverage native advertising in mobile, for example. So those 2 things will make our lives much easier.
Sandy?
Yeah, I don't think we need to do anything. I think it's going to happen, irrespective of what we do within, quite honestly, the ad community or the media buying community, or the content, to some extent, the content creator community. I guess if there's a couple things that would certainly help it along, the ability to somehow share data in a way that users are comfortable with. That's kind of the whole debate around PII and what you can obtain from users on mobile and tablet. Some of the solutions there would certainly make ads more personal, right? Because you'll just know and understand more, so that can help. But I think in addition to that, if you look at kind of where we were 5 years ago, where we are today, and where we all look at kind of Larry Page wearing his Google goggles and all the other things on the horizon, it's just going to continue to evolve, always faster than before. So I think I guess the last bit would be, certainly for brands and the agencies that represent them to maybe be a little more open to following that user a little faster would certainly help the whole industry move forward.
Great. Well, I think it's time to draw this session to a close. I'd really like to thank both of these guys. They've both traveled from the US, long long flight, but I'm delighted they were able to join us this morning. So I think they deserve a round of applause. First up on day 2 after a long flight. Well done.
Thank you.